Hello and good afternoon to everybody, depending when you are. Buenos dias or good afternoon. Welcome to the panel session, Nuestros Negocios and USHCC CARES, partnerships that empower small minority-owned businesses to navigate COVID-19. The panel has a long name, as if you recall from your school days, the longer the name, the more important the book. So this is a very important panel. Today, we will learn about how the United States Hispanic Chamber's CARE program is helping to meet the needs of Latino-owned businesses as they emerge from the pandemic. We will hear directly from Hispanic Chamber leaders about what is happening on the ground and how they are leveraging the USHCC CARES program to support their members. But first, let us begin by laying the foundation for our discussion with a brief presentation by Rhett Bottle, the founder of Public-Private Strategies, an organization where the public and private sector meet to solve pressing societal challenges. Brett is also Senior Fellow with the Aspen Institute, where he focuses on advancing the innovative Reconnecting Work and Wealth Initiative, a cutting-edge effort focused on re-envisioning the ways in which labor and financial markets can deliver inclusive growth and shared prosperity. Rhett, welcome to the Legislative Summit. The virtual stage is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I very, very much appreciate it. Let me get my screen turned on real quick. And start my video there as well, and we'll get the presentation going. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much. And thank you so much to the whole USHCC family for having me. I think what we wanted to do today was just lay a little bit of the foundation about how Hispanic small business owners are faring during this time during COVID-19. Obviously, things are looking up as we started to head towards the vaccine. But as you can imagine, our small business ecosystem and many Hispanic and Latino business owners have faced one of the biggest challenges of their lifetime, and maybe one of the biggest challenges that they'll ever face in their business. Just quickly, when COVID-19 broke out, many small business leaders from around our nation's capital and from around the country came together to think about, how do we build back better, and how do we start thinking about how to grow out of COVID-19? How do we begin to provide tools and resources? And we're going to hear about how some of your amazing chamber leaders responded throughout this panel. But at the national level, the US Hispanic Chamber and other leading business organizations came together to form an initiative that we call Reimagine Main Street, which is really focused on making sure that small business owners, their workers, are at the center of our nation's recovery. And as you can imagine, this coalition has been critical to generating data, insights, to bringing people together to exchange information, as well as working to tell the story of small business owners, and particularly Latino small business owners of color, and making sure that that information is feeding to policymakers. So that's really what's been at the heart of the Reimagine Main Street initiative, and USHCC has been a founding partner in this initiative. Through this initiative, one of the things that has been very important has been we've been focused on making sure that we are using data to tell the story and that we have the best accurate representation. And so working with USHCC and some of the other business organizations like the US Black Chamber and the National Asian Chamber of Commerce, we actually fielded what we believe is one of the largest business owner surveys, but then we were then actually able to cut it by race and ethnicity to really give policymakers, the media, and other important stakeholders access to information so that they could respond in more real time. We begin to do, we're continuing to do this research as we go forward, because as we all know, we're continually not out of COVID yet, and making sure that we have real-time insights is important. So what I wanted to do is just share a little bit of that information. I'm just going to share a few slides to sort of set the frame for the discussion. So what we overall see is that as you can imagine, COVID-19 hit all of our small business owners hard, but particularly hit small business owners of color hard, and Hispanic and Latino businesses are no different. You can see here in the slide of respondents, you can see that revenues are substantially down as an impact of COVID-19 in the Hispanic business community. Not only has it hit them difficult, but 1 in 4 actually Latino or Hispanic small business owners reports that they have they're operating with just a month's cash, which, as you can imagine, makes the small business ecosystem incredibly fragile. It makes these small business owners fragile, and it means that the response and that the help that they need from the government and state and local governments and private philanthropy and corporate partners is really important and impactful, obviously, in this critical moment. And even sort of furthering the story that we talked about, this poll was taken earlier this year. You can see that almost 1 in 5 Hispanic-owned businesses are not sure that they're going to make it to the end of the year. So this is incredibly, as you can imagine, heartbreaking news. One of the reasons we're all here is to be optimistic, to figure out how we can change that. And legislation, this being a legislative summit, is at the heart of that. And so one of the things that we really wanted to understand was, what are some of the policy solutions, or what are some of the things that the government can do to put us on a better stage? So we actually went across a whole variety of measures that we looked at. As you can see, we tested a whole bunch of different solutions, and a few things popped up. One is, we do see that access to the PPP loans, which, as you know, become forgivable grants, have done fairly favorable, and small business owners, who've been able to get access to them have done really well. We know that access hasn't been as good as it should be, and there's been efforts to continue to try to improve that. Some recent efforts by the Biden administration. We also see a real strong interest in contracts to small business and small business ventures, not only from governments, but also from the corporate sector, and a whole list of other things here that we tested that were important. One of the important layers in terms of how Hispanic or Latino business owners are thinking about this is, as you can imagine, the financial stress that they're feeling is really shaping how they think about their access to the public policy response. And I think in one case in particular, as many folks know, when the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP, was first rolled out, there was a lot of confusion about how it would become forgivable. There was a lot of preference for maybe grants versus loans. We see that here, really strongly in the polling, as well as, folks who want access to additional capital to restart their businesses, and tax incentives to help sort of with reopening costs. So hope that just gives a small little bit of framework about sort of where the status of sort of the economy is. Overall, one of the things that's really interesting about a lot of this research is business owners continue to be optimistic, even though COVID has been one of the biggest challenges of their lifetime. We see that in the data and the research. And we also know that, the data and the research give us just one perspective. And one of the most important pieces is these incredibly important resource partners, the work that the U.S. Hispanic Chamber is doing and its affiliates. And I think that's part of the discussion we wanted to have today. I give you just a little bit of a snapshot of the data and just a little bit of an overview. If folks want to check out more, I've put my information on the screen, as well as our website, reimaginemainstreet.org, of which USHCC is a founding member. And we have a whole bunch of data sets up there. In addition, we're actually going to be coming out with a new data set in just a week here that looks at small business owners and vaccines, and sort of the choice points that they're going to have to make around the vaccine conversation. So lots of fun, more interesting data and insights to come. And Jennifer, I will transition back to you with thanks, hopefully a fair stage, and look forward to joining the conversation.
Thank you so much, Rhett. I think I am a city planner, and as a city planner, I appreciate data, and really makes the work of chamber leaders like myself much easier. It helps us tailor the programs, the discussion, and the advocacy that we do on behalf of Latino-owned businesses. So, we know that the challenges are great. We also know that the Latino community is incredibly resilient and is very optimistic. And really, there's this attitude that I say, the attitude of resolver, which in other language, people call innovation, right? When you need to innovate, we in the Latino community say we need to resolver, right? So really, thank you for educating us on the challenges and aspirations of Latino entrepreneurs. We note that the resilience and creativity and really the grit of our community will ensure that we emerge out of the pandemic successfully. But in addition to Rhett, we're here for a larger discussion, of course. I would like to welcome to our discussion two colleagues and friends. Mayra Pineda, the President and CEO of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for Louisiana, and Ernie Cidebaga, President and CEO of the Albuquerque Hispano Chamber of Commerce. Both are also region representatives in the board of the United States Hispanic Chamber. Welcome to the stage or the virtual screen as we do these days. There's some topics that I want to address in our discussion today. We want to ensure that we talk about the work you are doing in partnership with the USHCC to support businesses in your communities. We want to learn about what best practices and successes you have had with your programs. What needs do you foresee as we emerge out of the pandemic? What will businesses need in the long term to grow? But first, why don't we begin the discussion? There was a poll at the very beginning of the panel or of this segment that asked you, how do Latino entrepreneurs in your network feel about the economic outlook through the end of 2021? And the results are in. About 75% of those that responded say that the Latinos in their networks are somewhat optimistic, which is a really, I would say, really good. And I think it goes along with this community that's so creative and so entrepreneurial. While 25% say that they are somewhat pessimistic. So there's a little bit of a tinge of hesitancy, I think, which is entirely understandable given that we are in such unprecedented times. So Mayra, why don't you, what is your reaction to that initial poll question?
Good afternoon, Jennifer and everyone. Thank you for including me in this conversation. I think the information that Brett gave us is very revealing of what is happening, in the ground. And when we say optimistic, it's because people are starting to feel, the vaccines are out, people are starting to get back to work. People are opening their businesses now in Louisiana at 75%. So sales are starting to come in. So people are feeling good about that. Also, I think there is that network of support that, that's where the work of local chambers and other organizations like us is so critical, because they know that they're not alone, and they see what is coming down from the administration all the way down to boots on the ground, making sure that someone is holding this small business owner's hand and help them navigate through the unprecedented business environment that they're facing. So it's right in line with what we see with all of these situations coming together and more opportunities. And like you said, the Hispanic community is resilient, has grit, where everyone sees the glass half empty, we see it half full, and we see opportunity. And there are many, many success stories in that regard.
And so, Rhett, do we think that people are a little bit too optimistic, or do you find that the balance that we hear today is quite right on the mark?
So I've been working on research projects for over 10 years with small business owners, and they are just an optimistic bunch, right? Like you have to be that way to be an entrepreneur. You have to get up in the morning and be able to, run through doors. And I think we see that reflected in the polling, even in the darkest times. So I think that's true. But, I think we can all agree that, people are understanding better. When COVID first happened, it was very confusing. What is this paycheck protection program? Should I even, take advantage of it? What does it mean for me? It's starting to become more clear, right? And some people have been able to get help. We need to get people more help, but I think that help has set in. It's given people that extra dose of confidence. I do think, the recent news around, vaccines and sort of the uptake, we just heard the president say that the vast majority of people next week, up to 90% of Americans, are going to be eligible. That sort of confidence in the economy, and when consumers begin to feel that sort of confidence, that begins to have an impact. And, small business owners in particular go hand in hand with the consumer base. And I think that that's sort of the reflection that we're seeing.
Well, that's great news. I mean, I think optimism, if when a community is optimistic, they're willing to take action. They're not as reserved as they would otherwise be. And so, when we talk about, we were a couple of years ago, we were in Albuquerque, New Mexico, really enjoying with Ernie. Ernie, where, if we take a the question was about the outlook into the future, but where is your Latino entrepreneurship? Where are Latino entrepreneurs today in your community, and how are you working with the United States Hispanic Chamber?
So yeah, thank you, Jennifer, and you know, I'll have to tell you, here in New Mexico, we're 48% Hispanic and 12% Native American, and I think just how things like this hit our community is a little bit harder than most. We are very dependent on federal spending, and so it takes a while to come out. It took a while for us to get out of the recession of 2007, 2008, that time frame. We had just gotten out of it when all of a sudden, whatever this thing is that hit, you know, I mean, it was like, what? This happened 100 years ago? So, you know, so I'll have to say, I think in New Mexico, it's a little bit more difficult. So I'd have to say, even though I think the Hispanic community is always a very optimistic community, and I think just because of their hard work and grit, they will succeed. But I think because of things that have occurred through no fault of their own, their business is going to change considerably. And they may not have been as ready to adapt to some of the technological needs that are required in order for the business to succeed. In New Mexico, we've had one of the most restrictive policies of any state. And so small businesses were especially hurt because the large box stores continued to remain open while the small businesses were closed. And so that really hurt them. And so I think they're optimistic, but I think it's gonna take us a couple of years. It's gonna take more years than maybe some of the other surrounding states that we're in right now. Just regarding the USHCC and the help and with the MBDA program, all that is very helpful. The PPE equipment that we've been able to give out, you know, a lot of these small businesses can't really afford it themselves. So when they're able to come to the chamber through our community drives, I think it's important that they're very appreciative of everything that they're given. But I think New Mexico, I hate to say it, and one last thing, and I'll shut up. Jennifer, thank you for mentioning the national convention. That was the last in-person national convention from the USHCC. And you think about how long ago that's been. We desperately need to get together again and talk and collaborate and hug. So.
Yes, we are all missing, as Latinos, you know, our hospitality and our embracing of strangers in many ways. It's really a defining characteristic. And Louisiana and New Orleans, where you are headquartered, Mayra, it's where tourism and hospitality is king, right? How have your businesses been affected? But more importantly, what have you been able to do to support them in partnership with the USHCC CARES?
Well, I know you heard a lot about essential employees, and this is the community where our Hispanic community was, you know, at the forefront. And with all of the hospitality being closed, hotels were impacted, tourist areas were impacted, and of course, they were out of jobs. And then our small business owners closed doors. So the impact was tremendous and continues to be. You know, we immediately shifted into virtual formats to try and continue to give the information and the guidance that our businesses and our community needed. That was, you know, very early on. And then advocate for our community at the decision-making tables, you know, from the governor's office all the way down to local administrations, to make sure that, you know, the hand was being raised to make sure, you know, our interests were taken into consideration when making decisions. The governor created a group, a commission that is called the Resilient Louisiana Commission. And we were very fortunate to lead one of the task forces that focused on small business and micro business owners. And where, you know, there was lack of guidance and there was a lot of confusion, like Ernie mentioned, you know, at the beginning. Now everything is starting to be clear because our business owners are more comfortable with, mask wearing, guidance and social distancing and percentages. But at the beginning, all of that was very blurry. And of course, they were more worried about making sure they had the rent payment for their businesses.
And so we're getting some comments talking about the need for flexible capital, grant funding, and we know, of course, as Red mentioned, that Latino businesses tend to be smaller and remain smaller even as they mature. They tend to not have the deep relationships with traditional banking institutions that were so critical at the very beginning of the pandemic in order to receive PPP funding. So I'm curious, clearly the program has improved. The accessibility for smaller, diverse businesses or minority businesses have become more intentional. I wonder from Ernie, from Rhett, Ernie, have you seen a shift? Have you seen how Latino-owned businesses become more involved and more successful in seeking those resources, and how?
Yes, I think it's gotten better from when it initially started. As we all know, initially, Latinos, Latinas, the fastest growing small business segment in the United States and in New Mexico, I think they were not getting the treatment that they deserved and needed. And I think that's, that's become better. But I think there is still somewhat of a hesitancy by some of these businesses to maybe even seek this help because they don't really understand what might happen to them. Right. They fully don't understand maybe or trust whoever they're dealing with on these things. We talk a little bit about advocacy for our businesses. We can do that politically, in which we should, but I think the number one thing we should all do as a Latina community is advocate for our small Hispanic businesses with our pocketbook. I mean, that is what they really need right now. I know they're getting help through at least our state government, the federal government, and that helps them some, but what they really need to do is be open, employing people and selling their wares or providing their services. So I think we should have initiatives ourselves to really do something more than we've done in the past and really look towards how we can help them with our pocketbook more than we are right now through our words in front of the state legislatures or even the city councils and things. But yeah, it's improved some, Jennifer. It still needs more, as we all know.
And I think you said something that's very important. I think for us that are working sort of behind the scenes and we are involved in advocacy and have relationships with economic development agencies and such, for us applying for grants and applying for programs with the federal government is second nature. But the reality is that entrepreneurs are not in the business of applying for subsidies, right? And no matter how easy or simple that subsidy might be, it's still a complicated process that they're unfamiliar with, that they don't quite know how it works, right? And if the entrepreneur is an immigrant, then the relationship with institutions, businesses, and language access brings yet another layer of complexity, and it just builds uneasiness. So I think, Ernie, when you say the best thing that we can do is be good consumers and support, small businesses, I think absolutely, I think businesses want to sell their goods, their wares, and their products ultimately, right? So that's, I'm sure that's music to a lot of the entrepreneurs in the audience. Go ahead.
And all.
Myra, do you want to get in?
I just wanted to add that you mentioned, Jennifer, that they're not familiar with, grants and subsidies. And a perfect example was the Main Street Recovery Program here in Louisiana. And that's where, we came in strong, trying to help business owners fill out the application. And it was a short application, but they didn't understand what they're giving me $16,000. Will I have to pay it back? How does this work? They're not used to people giving them anything for free. And, that's become large part of our technical assistance, helping them fill out those PPP loan applications, those grant applications, and any bank loan applications that they need because they don't understand it.
And Red, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I like Ernie's point about advocacy, and, I'm a federal policy expert, so I can talk about the changes that I think have been made. But I think we also need to think about advocacy in the Latino community even broader than just the government. We also need to advocate to our banks and financial institutions to meet Latino consumers where they're at. And, I think a lot of folks have learned a lot through the pandemic. So, that out of every great challenge comes opportunities. I don't think any of us would want to relive COVID. But, I think there has been an intense focus that we have to reach business owners of color in a new way. And I think there's an opportunity to be advocates with financial institutions as well, to help encourage them and incentivize them to reach Latino customers in a new way. And so, if banks and online lenders want to serve this demographic, they also need to meet that demographic where they're at and provide those tools and resources in a way that's accessible. So, the same way that we keep the government accountable, we should also be thinking about how do we keep these other institutions accountable to these communities as well. That's the only way that we're all going to grow better and collectively.
Absolutely. And I think there's some, from my experience as a leading a chamber of commerce, one of the relationships that we have been able to really, along with the USHCC CARES, that really provides us with the opportunity to increase the technical assistance and the support to Latino-owned businesses. Relationships with CDFIs, community development financial institutions, have been crucial. These are the institutions that tend to be more flexible in the availability of capital and programs when banks and larger, traditional financial services can't quite meet the demand. But one thing that I found in talking to our network of chamber presidents is that there are not that many Latino controlled CDFIs in the country. I think one of the largest ones is in Philadelphia, Community First Fund. So we were able to partner with them directly and funnel ourselves. We were able to funnel close to $2 million of micro PPP loans, which is like dozens of businesses. But unfortunately, I don't think that there are many relationships between Latino chambers and CDFIs. I mean, so Mayra and Ernie, what is your experience with these type of financial services institutions?
Yes, they're very limited here in Louisiana as well. However, I was very fortunate to be able to work with Hope Financial, which was doing a great job with the PPP process. And that's where I would send, I would constantly funnel all of my business owners asking for information and ready to apply through them. But we definitely need more, and we need Hispanic owned and represented.
Ernie, I have a question here for you. Can you share how the Albuquerque Hispanic Chamber is working directly with the Economic Development Department in New Mexico to create partnerships for small businesses?
Well, yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And we're fortunate that this Hispano Chamber here and the Albuquerque Economic Development have worked very closely with each other during this time frame. We've received a lot of PPE equipment, which is great. And right now we have like a warehouse full of this stuff, and we've had community drives. We've worked together with them on identifying which businesses, small businesses, we should be searching out for to give this to. So we've had a really good business relationship with the city economic development department. In fact, Cynthia Jaramillo, who runs that, used to work at the Albuquerque Hispano Chamber of Commerce. So her concerns are our concerns, because she comes from the small business mentality of how can we really help these small businesses. We desperately need to help them here in Albuquerque. Especially the tourism and hospitality, that sector, we had the most restrictive policy. If you came into New Mexico, you had to stay 14 days. So nobody was coming to New Mexico. We've barely lifted that as of now. And we desperately need to get people to come and come and spend money here, heads and beds, enjoy what we have here in New Mexico. We're starting to open up because we were completely closed down. The balloon fiesta, the largest gathering of balloons in the world that happens here, that was shut down last year. Our Gathering the Nations, the second largest powwow in North America, huge. 700 tribes from around the world come. I mean, all that stuff was shut down. And our UNM, our Lobo basketball team, Division I team, was the only men's basketball program that had to practice out of state and play home games out of state. Think about that. They couldn't even be in New Mexico practicing. So we've had restrictions beyond restrictions here. And so we have to work really closely with the city of Albuquerque, and we're doing that right now with their economic development department. Thanks for asking that question.
Well, I know that as the economy opens up, you will be front and center, as you have always been, in support of Latino entrepreneurs. You know, and hospitality, you know, Latinos, I think I want to talk a little bit, not only about present, a little bit about as we look into the future opportunities as we enter the second year of the pandemic. You know, clearly Latinos are the backbone of the hospitality industry in Philadelphia. The hospitality industry is probably the second largest business concentration in the Latino community. And one of the things that the Hispanic Chamber did in response to COVID was we created a social media campaign that we call Dine Latino Takeout Weekend, particularly when restaurants were closed down, they couldn't have indoor dining. We started promoting Latino dining opportunities because so many of these businesses did not have a social media presence at the beginning of the pandemic, right? So I think these are ways in which we Hispanic Chamber leaders are really innovating, are really taking, you know, the strength in our community and uplifting it. But now as we enter this second year of the pandemic, where do we see opportunities? I think I recall conversations we've had at the USHCC board level around the construction industry, infrastructure, and the opportunities that lie ahead for our community. We are the backbone in many ways of the construction industry on the labor side, right? But we think that there are great opportunities to also be a growing segment of the entrepreneurship side of the construction industry. Rhett, can you tell us a little bit about opportunities in different industries as we move forward?
Yeah, so I mean, you've pinpointed two really important, and one of the reasons, I don't know if you noticed in my opening when I talked about our initiative, we have in our mission statement, small business and their workers, because you know, it's such an important intertwined conversation. Small business owners care about the people who work for them much closely. So many of them feel like their family, and we see that particularly in manufacturing, construction, and hospitality, which are so key to, and we did actually look at industry focus in some of the research data we've done. And as you can imagine, those industries, because they require close contact, not only amongst staff and employees, are some of the ones that have been hit the hardest. I think there's some opportunity going forward on both sides. And, you know, some of this is, I think, driven by the federal landscape and where some of where the federal funds are flowing. There's a lot of money in the American Rescue Plan that is going to be trickling down, that is going to be important for these particular segments of the economy. One in particular is going to be administered at the SBA. It's a restaurant revitalization fund. It's the first of its kind of targeted effort, you know, to help restaurants get back up on their feet. That's going to be really important and huge. A lot of money went to the EDA, the Economic Development Agency, you know, which sits at the Department of Commerce, but that will primarily flow into states and local cities. And I think will touch a lot of the industries that you're talking about. And now, you know, we'll see if the president gets his wish, you know, but the president is also talking about an infrastructure plan, right, which has the ability to then, you know, potentially funnel a lot of federal funds. So, you know, that is more obviously a federal policy perspective and how funding flows, but obviously that has an overall impact on the economy, how these specific industries will be able to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, not only with the government, but will create opportunities for them in the private sector.
And of course, you know, one of the things that we hear is that there's a housing affordability crisis in our country and in many of our cities where chambers are located. And so that there may be local and state level opportunities as our governments, local and state governments, begin to invest in affordable housing. So how can we in the Hispanic Chamber community really be thoughtful and get ahead of the opportunity so that we can prepare Latino-owned businesses to contract with government to enter the supply chain. So I think that's a critical role we play. So we have a question here, and I just want to remind people that are interested in downloading RED's report that it is available in the resources tab. You can look at your screen, and that is available to you. We also have a question around why aren't more applications for the PPP loans and other programs not available in Spanish. Language access, I used to oversee the language access program in the city of Philadelphia. And there is federal legislation that says if you are receiving federal dollars, there's a requirement to provide language access to your community. So I think that's an advocacy point for a lot of our chambers, but we are glad to know that the Hispanic Chamber, the USHCC, does translate a lot of documents. And I think Mayra and Ernie, can you tell us a little bit about how do you approach the language access programs or challenges in your community?
So that's a reality, Jennifer, and we encounter it early on in the pandemic. Nobody from the administration, from the governor's office down, was translating anything. So we took it upon ourselves to start translating all of the communications and then, some of the applications, et cetera, until we got to the table and said, hey guys, this needs to change. And now you see press conferences being translated into Spanish after, the mayor or the governor speaks. Or in many of the applications, they're sending either to us or contract, professional to do it. So I think that is definitely needs to be at the very top of our priority list. Communications and information and all of those guidances need to come out in our language. And not only Spanish, but if you have a community, a Asian community or any other community, it needs to be translated so that they can access it easily.
New Mexico is pretty progressive in that respect. We do have a lot of that language in Spanish because we have such a large population in that respect. So it's not probably as a problem as it is in other states. But I can say for other languages like Asian, we also have Native American languages here in New Mexico because we have 22 tribes and pueblos, so that is an issue that needs to be resolved. But yeah, that can always be a barrier. And let me talk a little bit about construction because you brought that up. Here in New Mexico, that's a big problem for us because we have like a need for 30,000 construction workers currently right here in New Mexico presently. And we've talked to a lot of folks about it because they need to have some training, but these are good paying jobs. And I think what we need to do as a community is advocate for those that had other jobs, and this is what they're trying to do, is the people that might have had the hospitality type jobs, if they could get into this construction work, which many of them end up doing and have done in the past, they can find out that they can have a very good livelihood. In addition, they can move on and they already have different kind of training that will help in that construction training, because a lot of times if you're good at hospitality, then you know how to treat people, right? It's your livelihood to treat people well. So you need to, you can bring forward to that into the construction business. But here in New Mexico, we need people to come in here and work and get trained and get paid well. So that's a dire need here in New Mexico.
And we have a need for that, but really, I think we also have a need to ensure that we have opportunities for businesses to be created and grow in that field, right? There's the challenges of small businesses becoming involved in the construction industry are many. Cash flow is a very, very big challenge. So the relationships with banks and financial institutions are critical. The back office is critical. It's a very complex and risky industry to get into, but it is one that has a lot of opportunities because construction cannot be outsourced to any other country, can't outsource construction to China, to Russia, to South America, to Mexico. It must be done in place, right? So I think there's a challenge for us in the Latino community to ensure that we are not only on the labor side of this industry, but we're also on the entrepreneurship and ownership side of the industry. And really, one of the things that was interesting to me last year, the year before, when the Aspen Institute released its playbook on how to grow Latino businesses, and the title is not exactly that, it's similar to that, but talking about really the need to have Latino businesses move from a business to consumer part of the economy to a business to business side of the economy. In other words, entering the supply chain. And I think that's something that the United States Hispanic Chamber is very focused on. I think that's something that increasingly our chambers are becoming much more active. So, you know, I think there are a lot of stories to be told. I wonder if Mayra, if you have any stories. I think this panels are never complete without a success story.
Absolutely. Well, I have success stories of you know, members of the chamber that have pivoted and were able to save their business. So I had, for example, a graphic designer that shifted and started creating, using her creativity to create PPE, you know, the plexiglass screens and the sanitizer trays and all kinds of different things. And she's doing fantastic job now, because she used to serve the conventions center and, you know, all of the conventions coming in with signage and all that. Now she has that because they're starting to trickle in, but she has her pivot, which kept her afloat during the pandemic. And then I have another one, which is a jeweler. She had her, you know, storefront, and it was a beautiful little store. And of course, with everything closed, the rent wouldn't stop, and she decided to close permanently, but pivoted into online. And she's doing an amazing job. The money that she was investing in, for example, rent or you know, utilities, now she's investing it into professional marketing and a PR company to help her market her company, and doing fantastic. So those are amazing stories for me, and just those I'm very proud of.
Yeah, we had in Philadelphia on the food and hospitality side, we had the restaurants that had to basically shrink and became smaller initially, right? But then they started receiving contracts to, instead of selling to consumers, they started selling to hospitals and started to do you know, catering and entering again that supply chain. And now they have become, you know, primary providers of lunch and food for hospitality, for hotel, not for hotels, for hospitals, for other institutions that they would not have done that before. And we know that supplier contracts tend to be really good ways of getting steady income or steady revenue that really enables a business to grow and become more profitable. We have a manufacturer of vegan food, Argentina, Love Foods, who had a retail outlet. Well, guess what? Target, Whole Foods, and others, as we migrated towards grocery more and, you know, cooking at home because the restaurants were closed, she saw an incredible demand for her product. So she had to sort of put aside her growth plan of franchising, and she said, let me put that on hold and let me concentrate and expand the manufacturing side of the business. So Latinos, you know, this idea of resolver. Yeah, absolutely.
But you mentioned something very important about, you know, the supply chain and procurement. And here in Louisiana, we have a big focus in that area because we understand that we need to prepare our businesses to learn how to do business with corporations or with the federal government. And so that's a big focus that we have in making sure that we, you know, build that capacity in our small business owners, because I have the companies and organizations, and we know the federal government is always buying, but they're looking at us. Okay, where is my list? I want them in my system so that I can then reach out and, provide the opportunity for contracting.
So I have a couple of little sayings on top of my monitor here at work. One of them is, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And the other one is, winners evolve from disruptions. And I think all of us here knows those businesses that are actually becoming winners through this disruption. We know people have pivoted. We had one that was a distillery that began making hand sanitizer that all of a sudden started making bourbon and a bourbon and whiskey program. And they actually sold more last year than the year before. And so they had better business in 2020 than they did in 2019. We have, hey, you're going to thank me for this. If you all have aches and, where your muscles ache and all that stuff, there's a product manufactured here in Albuquerque called Sore No More that you can get at Whole Foods or some of the healthcare stores. Sore No More. You will thank me when you buy that. Well, they sell it worldwide, but they had to also pivot, and they bought a whole new huge building so they could manufacture hand sanitizer because they have a big contract with the federal government. So they pivoted. I mean, so there are winners, there's losers, but I think a lot of times we know Latinos, they don't lose, they fight, and they're going to find a way. And so, but let's support them. That's our goal, is to support these businesses.
We have a question from the audience around relationships and special relationships that chambers of commerce may have with the banking traditional banks. And I wonder, Mayra, I see you nodding. In what ways do you work closely with banking institutions?
I work very closely with banking institutions, the wide variety, because, we have corporate, we have community, we have the CDFIs, we have the credit unions. So, and they each have products that can benefit our small businesses. So we work closely with them in education, financial literacy programs, and just making sure that we are referring small businesses to the right institution for their needs. And I think that is very critical. And that's why they say, businesses that are tied to a network like a local chamber are more successful. We saw now how it impacted some of the small businesses not having a relationship with a banking institution. So many of them would come to me and say, where do I go? I don't know where to go. So that it started because they may have a bank account, but that doesn't mean they have a relationship with the bank. Correct. And it's very different. And Correct. That's where we come in, and we are, the service that we provide and the information and knowledge.
So Ernie, I say oftentimes that re-emerging and entering this economy takes more than just simply turning on the lights, the regulations, the complexity. How are you helping, and what relationships are critical for you to be able to support Hispanic or Latino-owned businesses at this time?
Well, I think the banks, obviously, but we know that some of the larger businesses, essential businesses, they did very well during this pandemic, and they're wanting to give back. They want to give back to the community. So we act as a conduit. We've started a program called Buen Vecinos, Good Neighbor, which a number of these businesses have put in $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 into this fund to help our membership that might be struggling that they're going to stay open, but they can't afford membership, and they can't afford taking advantage of some of the things that we can offer as a member here at the Hispano Chamber. And through this program, their membership is paid for. So, there's ways that I think successful, larger businesses, they want to give back to the community, and they need a vehicle to do that. And I think chambers are a really good model for that. and provide an opportunity to do this. I learned this from Stephen Trujillo at the Pueblo Chamber of Commerce. So shout out to Stephen on that. And, but, you know, so there are a number of ways, and it is relationship based. But, you know, I think that just the fact that I know there's the community of folks that really want to help our small businesses get back on their feet again and prosper. So that's just one of the initiatives. We've done so many others. We've had community drives. We've had PPEs. There's one business, one restaurant that never laid off anybody during their whole time, but instead we worked with them to go around to the essential workers, and they gave food to the essential workers, and other businesses would pay for that food to do it. So they were able to keep their employees hired, over 100 employees. So, I mean, there's ways to do it. It's just got to be creative.
I think creativity, right? And I think I like that idea, Mayra, about having larger corporations create a pool of funding that will support membership for Latino-owned businesses that perhaps at this time cannot afford to be members of our chambers. I think, you know, we have learned the importance of being networked, of having people as entrepreneurs, of having people that can make a difference in the success of your business be part of your ecosystem, if you will. And so many of the Latino businesses in our communities are just not participating actively, and they're just trying to figure out how to do it on their own. And really supporting businesses is a community sport, right? Really developing Latino-owned businesses, ensuring that solo entrepreneurs become employer firms grow to become even larger and reach thresholds of $1 million in sales and more, of starting to hire people. It's really a community sport, and all of us have a role to play. And we need to really make sure that the communication, the message gets out that Latino entrepreneurs, you are not and should not be doing this on your own, right? And I see Red, you're nodding. I don't know, Red, do you have any data or any insight that you might want to?
No, I think this is right on. I think, you know, we talk a lot in our field about a term like trusted guidance. And, you know, you can only go, you know, as a business owner, you're being hit with so many things. You can only go so far. You need sort of that trusted guidance. And I think this is where chambers like yours really step into play. And, you know, there's, you know, and then I think it is not only corporations, but quite frankly, the government's job to support chambers like yours to be able to create those things. And, you know, there's a new program coming down as part of the American Rescue Plan. Some folks have heard about the Community Navigator program, which is going to be administered and really focused on reaching business owners of color to give them the sort of trusted guidance, you know, and I think there's a lot of hope that the government will continue to support important intermediaries like you all who have that sort of trusted guidance to help business owners get from that next stage. We know what the research says. We need the resources to empower local chamber like yours to be able to help small business owners who need help when they need it, to help them move through that sort of success chain.
I am looking forward to that program, because I think that absolutely trusted guidance and really we are the folks that are on the ground that really know who needs the help, how they like to receive help as well. We have a question from the audience that talks about what would it take to start a growth fund with the United States Hispanic Chamber and with the private sector to get grants out? I think you know, there's a lot of conversation around making access to capital. You know, have you know, Mayra and Ernie, what are your thoughts? I think, you know, we have the United States Hispanic Chamber has an education fund. There's a lot of conversations around this. What's your opinion?
I think it's a great idea, and like you mentioned, we have discussed it, you know, at the USHCC level, and there's a lot of interest. But this is a conversation that we've had locally too. It's needed. It's needed because that's the first stop. You know, a lot that businesses have. You know, where do I go? And it's going to be a lot easier if we're able to then distribute those funds or allocate them a little easier. So absolutely, that conversation needs to be elevated. But also, Jennifer, through this pandemic, we've heard a lot about diversity and inclusion, and with everything that has happened, that has been a focus as well. And I think many of the corporations, to Ernie's point, are aware that changes need to be made to really be intentional in working with our minorities, with Hispanic-owned businesses, with women-owned businesses. And that help is coming. I'm very, we all have amazing sponsors, very generously giving back to the community through our local chambers and on their own. So we just need to continue advocating and raising our hand where we need to find that support for this effort and for any other effort that we have at the local level.
And so, Ernie, where do you sit on the conversation about creating a growth fund for Latino businesses? What do you think?
Well, I tell you, any fund that is helpful to grow small businesses, if there are folks that are willing to help the chamber provide that opportunity, I don't think I could answer it any better than Myra did. I just want to also kind of say one thing for our chambers. Our chambers have to exist. And it's a difficult time for chambers to exist right now because, first of all, memberships, it's hard to retain current members. And it's also hard to get new members. And it's hard, we've had to, all of us probably had to furlough some employees and do that, right? But so I think chambers need to look at this as also an opportunity for them to become a winner through this disruption and look at other revenue sources to help them continue to make their membership affordable, but also seek other revenue streams. We've been successful recently on other large grants and opportunities, which really kind of help relieve the pressure, so to speak, and allow you to be more creative and more forgiving. Because as chambers, we're all small businesses. We all have to make payroll. We all have to continue to exist. And we have to exist to help these small Hispanic minority businesses succeed. So all I can say is for ourselves, for not us to hunker down, for us to look at other revenue sources as well, like Buen Vecinos, and also like grants or other opportunities. Take the time, find a good grant writer. We just recently signed up with a group called Foundation Search for 5 years, and that's going to help us continue to do that because we see that as an opportunity. So I think in order for us to help, we need to continue to exist. So
that's very well said. And one of the things that we're doing in the Hispanic Chamber here in Philadelphia, and we're currently fundraising. So whomever is out there and is interested in building construction businesses in the Latino community, we're creating an initiative that we're tentatively calling Build Latino, and it's about building and skilling up entrepreneurs, that Latino entrepreneurs in the construction industry, making sure that they move from doing, little jobs, gig jobs here and there, to really forming complete organizations that can manage payroll, that can manage field operations, that can manage cash flow, that can really successfully compete for contracting opportunities, because we know that they are coming. And it would be really a shame that we did not take advantage of really the opportunities that will be coming to us in the next 5, 10, 15 years. So I think we can really be transformational in building wealth in our community. So, we're coming a little bit to a close. I think it's been a very rich conversation. We've talked about the work that the United States Hispanic Chamber through the CARES program is doing with local chambers. We've talked about how the resiliency and the grit in Latino entrepreneurship. We have had expert opinion or data presented to us that really lays out where we are and what the aspirations and the opportunities are for our community. On behalf of the board of directors, I really want to thank Red Bottle. Remember, you can download the report from the resources tab in this chat, or not the chat, on the screen. I really want to thank our friend Mayra Pineda and Ernie Sidebaca, whom are representatives of the region. They also sit on the board of directors of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, and really the staff for making this legislative summit real, virtual. We do hope that in the year to come, we will once again be together. We thank the Comcast of this, the sponsor for this session, Comcast, NBC, and Telemundo. And to the audience, once again, stay tuned. This is a rich program. And for those that would like more information about the USHCC CARES program, please visit USHCCCares.com. Thanks to all.